think we're up and running. Hello, everybody. I'm Brandis Friedman from WTTW. I want to welcome all of our panelists from your respective places of being. I think we're all at home today. If it's okay with you guys, I mean, since we're all at home, let's just keep it casual. I'm going to ask everybody to kind of introduce themselves, if that's okay. I know our visitors can see it, obviously online, but to introduce yourself and give us kind of an impression of what you do and how you use FOIA. And then I think we'll get into, more specifics about, particular stories. And then we'll take questions because I feel like people come to FOIA Fest to get their questions answered. So we'll do that after a little bit. So Claudia, if it's all right, I'm going to start with you, please.
Okay. Hi, I'm Claudia Morell. I'm a reporter with WBEZ Chicago Public Radio. I cover City Hall, and I've been there since 2018. And I don't use FOIA on a regular basis as much as I would like to, but I have done a couple stories. Like one was the aldermanic attendance story was probably my biggest FOIA story because it required us to sue the city. And it now is the reason why aldermen take attendance at committee meetings, because the whole aspect of it was I wanted to know, were aldermen actually showing up to these meetings and why it seemed that there was never a quorum. And so that was one time that I used it.
Ross?
Hi, everybody. I'm Ross Widener. I'm an investigative producer at ABC 7 WLS here in Chicago. I work primarily with Chuck Gowdy and the I-Team, focusing on data investigations as well as breaking news-based investigations. So primarily I use FOIA in an effort to broaden out a hit from basically mayhem that has happened and find more stuff to go on with the mayhem. So that's what I do.
Ben?
Mayhem, I like that, Ross. I'm Ben Bradley. I am a investigative reporter at WGN in Chicago. I used to work with Ross and the crew over at Channel 7 until I moved over to GN about 4 years ago. And I think of myself as kind of a, unfortunately, part-time investigative reporter, part-time anchor, which sometimes makes me feel like I'm doing neither well. But our shop at GN is unique and special in that we do these 7 to 8 minute long TV investigations, which are relatively unheard of in broadcast news, although Channel 2 is doing a lot of good stuff. Shout out to you. But what we try to do, I think, is, when we sense there's a story, we put FOIAs in right away, because oftentimes the FOIA itself will give us that one nugget, that one factoid, that one piece of information to hang a much bigger story on that I think so often you end up with people going, oh, I have this element and this element and this element, but how do I tie it all together? And so I think that's so often what public documents do for us.
And Sama.
Hey guys, I'm Sama. I'm an investigative producer over at CBS Channel 2. I use FOIA pretty much in my day-to-day and long-term and short-term investigations. FOIA's data documents are my favorite things, and I do a lot of data analysis. As much as it bothers me when agencies don't give me data and documents, I love doing transparency stories about them and calling them out for it. So there's always a way to do a FOIA story, even if you're not getting a FOIA. So that's one of my favorite things too. So maybe we can talk a little bit about that as well.
Yeah, I definitely want to get into that. And I want to kind of pick up on something that Ben said with regard to, sometimes the FOIA is just one thing that you hang a bigger story on. So I'm kind of wondering how often, chances are you're probably in the middle of, or you already have the story idea when you go looking for your FOIA, or is sometimes the FOIA the source, do you get a FOIA, and if there's nothing in it that you're looking for, then maybe this isn't the story we thought it was and we move on. So I'm kind of wondering, how do you know, what you're looking for, or, do you know what you're going to get when you ask for that FOIA request sometimes? Ben, I'll start with you since you kind of mentioned that.
Yeah, I think, what we try to do, and maybe this is backwards from what other folks do, but so often for us, finding the character, the person who humanizes the story and really makes it clear to viewers is the hardest part. So I've seen it done both ways, where people find their, their victim first or their hero of the story first, and then do the FOIA, or do the FOIA and then realize, oh, I've got this nugget. Now, how do I find somebody? So I would just encourage folks to think about it as a two-way street, because whereas I used to do it with do the FOIA, get the data, then try to build a story around it. Oftentimes, when you're getting a sense from somebody who's reliable that this is a real story, it's probably happened to more people, et cetera, then you can and they say, oh, well, I filled out XYZ form for the Illinois Department of Employment Security and I never heard back. Or then you can more precisely, I think, do a strategical strike with your FOIA to know what you're looking for.
Does anyone else want to sort of weigh on it? Go ahead, Simone.
I'm happy to weigh in on that as well. I mean, I think it just depends, I feel like it's a mix for me and for our team at Channel 2. I feel like, sometimes we'll get tips from sources or from the community, and that prompts us to want to file a FOIA or dig into something to see if what they're saying is true, or to see if we can, establish or track down a pattern of what it is that they're claiming, the issue that's affecting them. Other times I'm truly just digging around and being nosy and curious, and, it may not just come from a tip. It might be just something I'm interested in. A lot of the stories that I work on are related to police, systemic issues in policing, sexual assault. These are issues that I'm already interested in and have had experience covering. So to me, I kind of just naturally start exploring those areas, and I just get curious, and I may truly just go fishing, as they say, and just file FOIAs about something. And it may lead to nothing, but a lot of times it's led to something. So sometimes it's truly a mix. But like I said, sources are also helpful too, because they may have something, but they can't physically give it to us, in a safe and secure way, but they may actually be able to guide me on what to FOIA and how to FOIA things. So building relationships in the community, whether it's with, actual members of the community, people who live in their neighborhoods and communities and know the issues that are going on, or people, attorneys, activists, anyone who really is passionate about an issue, they know the types of records and documents that exist and the paper trail that is generated on certain issues. So it's also helpful to lean on them for guidance too.
Yeah, I mean, to that point, your sources help you actually target the FOIA so that you're asking for this email on this day with these words, as opposed to being, give me all of Governor Pritzker's emails, because they're just going to deny that. As we all know, there's all kinds of, people are looking for every excuse not to give you information, not to give you what you're looking for. But if your source can be like, well, it was on these days and it's this kind of form and it's that, you have that extra leg up. It's not just throwing, a FOIA to the wind. It's trying to seek something with it.
Yeah, I think the FOIAs that I file would be in two buckets. One would be ones that I file quarterly. So every couple of months, at one point, I asked for federal subpoenas that were filed to the law departments of various city agencies. So city colleges, CPS, City of Chicago, and then CTA. And sometimes those will net stories on their own. And sometimes, I'll get a lot of nothing back. And then other times are when I'm looking for something specific, where, I had a source that told me that this is something I should look for. This is a report that I should look for. And so I found that the quarterly ones help when, there's a lull and, I'm looking for story ideas. And it's a good exercise in, seeing what's out there.
I just want to quickly add to that really quick, just the regularly development of stories and constantly filing up the same FOIAs, but for new data. So if you have a data set that is really helpful, like let's say just here in Chicago, we have it available on the city's public data portal, which is nice, but that's not the same everywhere. Like salaries of people. I mean, that's just helpful to have information, a salary database of every city employee, or, a records retention schedule, which tells you like every single record that a police department has to track and keep and for how long, so that you can know what to ask for and how, legal fees, anything that is interesting to you, just keep filing that over time, so that you always have it on you. So if a story breaks or there's something going on, you have that context in your back pocket to dig into.
That's a good
one
point.
One good thing to have on hand, I think, are, and to Claudia's point, you don't always have to FOIA this because some of it's available online, but police pursuit policies, obviously employee databases, salary schedules, pensions. We had, when Mike Madigan, finally announced his retirement, we had already pulled his pension. So we already had that. One thing I think Channel 7 and Ross and Chuck and their team are phenomenal at is anytime there's a big or newsworthy event in the city, it seems like they just flood the field with FOIAs, and we all cover it as big breaking news day one, day two, and then everyone kind of forgets about it. And 5 days later, people who always know to file the same types of FOIAs after a guy is caught living in O'Hare, or after a guy is dragged off a United plane in a noise, oh, wait, what do you mean I could FOIA the video from the gate? And, I think if you just get in the habit, you'll find that there are a lot of stories that'll get done off of big news stories once everyone else forgets about it. And maybe even you've forgotten about it, but you put in the FOIA when it happened, and then ding in your inbox is everything you need for a follow-up.
And that makes me kind of question what challenges you guys run into with what's not FOIA-able. For example, like if it's video, for example, Ben, I don't know if you experienced this with your red light camera story, with getting any access to that information, and struggling with getting access to information from a privately held company, and what workarounds you figure out.
Yeah, and even among different government agencies. So the story that Brandis is referencing, we did 2 weeks ago. Basically, everyone's reported on SafeSpeed, the company that's came to be in the suburbs for red light cameras, and turns out one of their founders was allegedly passing envelopes of cash and bribing suburban officials to get those cameras put up. Not all of them, but some of them. And that story's been reported 1,000 times. What we tried to do is say, now, wait a minute. Since it first became public that a SafeSpeed founder had greased the wheels for these cameras, how much money have drivers had to pay off these cameras? And so, we went and found the date, the indictments became public, and then FOIA'd that date forward in all the suburbs that had been touched. And that way we could say, 21 towns had collected a total of more than $18 million from SafeSpeed red light cameras just since the first indictment was handed down. So sometimes it's just looking at a big unwieldy data set and saying, let me pin it in one sentence to, wait a minute, we knew these cameras may have come in under a corrupt basis, and since we've known that, how much have they still been clicking away? SafeSpeed was never going to give us that information, obviously, but there were ways to go around it and build a story based on that.
Well, and Ben, if you're talking red light cameras, you've got to bring up your just getting the ROM's license plate and throwing that in the database.
Well, I wish I could say that was FOIA or that was some great piece of investigative journalism on my part, but ROM had pissed me off because he had been a jerk. And it was when the city was first, rolling out red light speed cameras and whatnot. And ROM had this news conference where he trotted out like a 10-year-old girl with her arm in a cast as the poster child of, oh my God, if we don't put these cameras up, little children are going to die everywhere. And when I, as the street reporter covering it that day, raised my hand and said, well, Mayor, will you at least just acknowledge that this is as much about revenue as it is about safety? And he wagged his finger at me and, basically said, how dare I question his pure motives? And he was such a jerk about it that when I walked out of City Hall, I happened to see his 2-car motorcade sitting out there waiting for him. And I had recently gotten a red light ticket, so I knew you could just put in the license plate number, and if you could figure out the ownership structure, which who owns city vehicles? City of Chicago. So I ran both his plates that day. And it wasn't even a FOIA. It was, well, I guess it didn't start with a FOIA, but that's how we got all the video of ROM running red. And then what we did is we put in FOIAs to see how many of those tickets had been paid, how many hadn't, and we realized that the mayor's vehicles had been noted as eligible for booting due to lack of payment of red light tickets. So it was a fun little story, and I got the 4.5 finger salute from ROM over it, and that made it all worthwhile.
So we've got a question in the chat from an attendee that I want to go ahead and get to, because I want to make sure that folks have the opportunity to ask their questions. Obviously, I've got more if we need to, but from the audience. Do you feel working for such large and recognized networks as all of you do that this gives you a leg up on your FOIA requests, whether it's in response time or having access to legal departments within your organizations, et cetera? Sama, you've got a good answer for this.
Yeah, and I'm laughing because not this is actually a really good question, but I'm smiling because, well, one, there's a privilege to working for a news organization, yes, right, and a network. So, we may not always be able to exercise it, but we do have access to, a legal team that if we needed to sue or if we needed to fight for records or, something like that, that we have access to those resources. The reality is we can't do it for necessarily everything, but we do have a team, behind us that can back us up. And so that is a privilege of working for a news organization in general, but then also, a large network or a large organization. But I was smiling because sometimes I feel like, filing a FOIA request as a journalist actually prohibits us from getting documents because oftentimes, city officials, police departments are putting up insane roadblocks to try to stop us from getting information. And if you file FOIAs for emails, like, the email dump from the Anjanette Young case, you'll quickly see the PR campaign that happened to block and cover up that video. So, so that's one example, but at times we're fighting for records, basic records that we should be able to get, but because agencies know that we would probably do a story about it, or they are maybe upset that we've done previous stories that were negative or exposed something wrong in the system, like, for example, body camera video, speaking to your last question, that's one thing that we have challenges with all the time because there's so many exemptions in state FOIA law related to body camera video. So the irony is that's a taxpayer funded tool meant for transparency. And the irony is it's so ridiculously hard to actually get it and see it, which is insane to think about. So you can't get video if there's an ongoing investigation. And if it involved a private person, a regular civilian, you can't get it. So we found ways to combat that, which is working with families for them to file lawsuits because they have a right to it in the law. If they were the subject of body camera video, they can get it. But as we saw in Anjanette Young's case, the city wrongly denied Anjanette's FOIA for the video when they should have given it to her and cited an ongoing investigation. So you see these different, if it's not one thing, it's another thing. And so we've had to get, creative to find other ways to get information, like working with affected families, like working with sources who may have gotten the video through other ways. And so I just wanted to kind of share that if that's helpful, to FOIA, unfortunately, is, as much as I love it, I also can't stand it because there are too many damn exemptions in Illinois, so you got to use other tools.
In the interest of maybe talking about a couple of specific stories, Claudia, one that you did, aldermanic attendance before 2019. Give us a little bit on how you did that, please, and what that story was, of course.
Yeah, so the honest for the story was I worked at the Daily Line Alder track for about 4 years, and I would be sitting in the city council chambers, and I noticed that there weren't a lot of aldermen attending these committee meetings. And so when I tried to FOIA the documents to find out the attendance sheets to prove that aldermen weren't showing up, it turned out that they didn't even keep records of attendance to the point where the budget committee, Carrie Austin's committee, they only had a fraction of the attendance sheets. Hundreds of meetings there were no records of. And so we had to sue them in order to get the documents. And then when they said that there were no responsive documents, we had to FOIA emails of them to prove that they actually looked for them. And then eventually we had to get Matt Topic on board to help us. And it turned out that the city council wasn't properly following state law with FOIA requests because there weren't even FOIA officers for city council. Until recently, you had to go through the mayor's office. And so that was one example of doing multiple FOIAs, of trying to just get basic information of something that should have just been publicly available. And so now whenever you see city council meetings, they do take attendance before every meeting and they do have a record of it. And I feel like if we hadn't have done that, things wouldn't be that way.
Because you mentioned it, and for the attendees who don't know, tell everybody who Matt Topic is, please.
Oh, he is a FOIA attorney extraordinaire. And it also goes to the other point about working for a large news organization. I don't think we would have been able to have him help us with that if I, was working on my own, or if I was at my former employer.
Yeah, I think,
I would just add to that,
media organizations. Go ahead.
Yes, there is an advantage to working for a large organization, but keep in mind, you all have an attorney at your fingertips, which would be the Attorney General's public access counselor, which is actually the first place we turn to when we're denied a FOIA based on something we think should be public, especially if it's not from the city, but if it's from some suburb who doesn't get FOIA law or thinks they can just be obstinate about it. It's super easy to go to the Illinois Attorney General's website, the public access counselor. You upload what you requested, the denial, and why you think they should intervene on your behalf. And I've found, at least 50% of the time that will jar it loose from the municipality. No charge, by the way.
Ross, tell us, if you would, about a story that you did recently on vaccine waste and how you used FOIA for that one.
Well, yeah, so this sort of turns FOIA on its head, because I feel like in the pandemic, FOIAs just sometimes don't get responded to. And it's they claim, oh, we're too busy and it's a pandemic and it's chaos. And some of that's true. And we buy that. But with the vaccine waste, we were looking at the state's vaccine distribution plan. And the last page of it is a form that each entity is supposed to fill out when they waste or transfer a dose. I'm like, okay, well, if there's a form, that means there's a database, and give it to me. So the state and the city are awful and don't respond. And as usual, they just drag their heels until the very last minute. So what we did, and this is what we've been kind of thinking about, different ways to get things. I always think about who else has this, or where else. Let's triangulate here. This is going to go to the CDC eventually. So I FOIA'd the CDC. And I'm like, well, yeah, but it also probably came from like Kane County. And I like them and they like me. Let me call them. So they gave me their number, which was 2 or whatever. It's a very small number of waste, by the way. So then by collecting a few counties manually, you can then, I feel like, go back to those people that are holding off on the FOIA and say, okay, look, I know that these major counties have already collected this many and thrown them in the trash. It's going to look real bad if I have to go on TV and say, the city of Chicago refuses to tell me, and how many are ending up in the trash. It could be hundreds, and is your family at risk? And then they spit out a number. So I feel like there's sometimes, the first thing you want to do is file a FOIA and wait for it to come back. But if I did that, sometimes the story would never ever air. And with the vaccine waste story, we kind of forced it by turning FOIA on its head to some degree. And Channel 2 is fabulous at putting that call out part in their story. I mean, I think Sama on your team is just fabulous. I wish I could do that.
It takes a little swagger to do it the way they do it.
It's really
we get a little snarky with it.
But it's good. That's what we need to do. So yeah, FOIA is a tool, and it's also kind of an art to some degree. And I feel like all of us using different techniques to get things, makes it fun. So.
Sama, talk a little bit about, kind of what to do when your FOIA is denied. Obviously, you can fight to keep it alive, but also how you keep the story alive in the meantime. And I think you guys had some experience with that in the Anjanette Young case, but tell us about that, please.
Sure. And I'm sorry, I literally have like bright light shining at me in a window.
It looks great.
I look like I'm in a Batman movie or something. So I'm just going to try to shift. So, I mean, I think like Brad was saying, Ben Bradley, Mr. Bradley was saying that we have we try to take so many different steps before. It's not often that we immediately can be like, oh yeah, I I'm going to go file a lawsuit. Even though we're a large organization, it doesn't mean we can just file a lawsuit, or that does take resources and time. So there are multiple other steps that you can take before getting to that point that we have found to be successful. And we just kind of put them in our back pocket and we try to exhaust them all before we feel like we can take it to that step. So, like Ben was saying, I mean, one of the key things is the Attorney General, right? And there are pros and cons to that. So first of all, it's free. Second of all, they have the powers to enforce it and force the city or a state agency to hand over records. The con is that it takes a while sometimes. I'm still waiting on them to finish reviewing a request from nearly a year ago, but there are times where they've ruled in our favor. So it's worth it to, just file that request with the Attorney General and let them work on it, follow up with them. That really helped us with the Anjanette, not just the Anjanette Young case, but with our, uncovering the pattern of wrong raids, because we fought for search warrant data for a year that police refused to give us, and the Attorney General eventually forced them to give that to us. So while we were behind the scenes fighting for that data, we were still developing stories. And my next point, I think, would be that if they're not giving you records, do a story about them not giving you the records. And it works sometimes, it doesn't work sometimes, but it's a tool to have, okay? Just staying on top of it, getting it on the record that the agency is not being transparent with you. And there was a wrong raid we uncovered where an 8-year-old was handcuffed and the city refused to give us the body camera video. They claimed that it was overly burdensome to go through 16 hours of video and redact exempt information. So we did a story the next day about how it was totally cool for them to go through hundreds of hours of Jussie Smollett body camera video and release it. But for other video, they don't want to do that. So that, it's kind of comparing and contrasting issues is helpful too, because, you find discrepancies and inconsistencies in what they do. And so the next day we actually got the video. So it doesn't always work out that easily, but sometimes it does. And another final option that I'll say, in lieu of filing a lawsuit or taking legal action, is crowdsourcing for information. And, we do a lot of putting together pages and forms on our website, trying to get information. Ben, you were talking about the IDES issue, and as you probably know, we've all had trouble getting information from IDES, and there are a lot of exemptions in the law because they're partially, federally funded too. So, so we put a call out for sources directly talking to people inside IDES, saying, hey, come forward to us if you have information and tips as employees. And we gave them secure ways to reach out to us, and they did. And we did a whole story on what they were able to expose that we couldn't get through FOIA. So those are just some ways that have helped us.
Samad, does that ever backfire though? The look what they're not giving us story?
Honestly, no. I mean, we've never really had an issue backfire with us. We've kind of accepted that, our job is to hold them accountable. These agencies are already fighting us to not give us records. We're not hurting our relationship with that agency by further exposing that they're not being transparent with the public. For the most part, it either has forced them to or pressured them to do something, or if it didn't, we did our jobs. It was our responsibility, we feel, and our duty to report that they were not being transparent with the public.
We've got some questions from our audience, unless any of you wants to add anything. That's a negative, Ghost Rider. All right, I'm going to start with this one because I think it's a good broadcast question, and then I'm going to work my way backwards. So this one is, with regard to production, is there a way that you structure or present stories for broadcast? Ben mentioned RUM's license plate, which suggests the actual video will be played within the story, but what about paper documents? What's the best way to present some of these cases to the audience?
Well, I think it's a long-standing debate over how do you make FOIA interesting on TV. And for a long time, many people in our line of work would just take a huge stack of paperwork, smack it on the table. And say, look at that! I worked so hard on this story, and it's
with light going right over it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
That's not going to work. So A couple of things though is sometimes I've seen some really great examples. I think NBC in New York, usually, like if they have really cool documents, they'll do something topical with them. So for example, they were doing a story on stabbings on the subway or something, right? And they had a big pile of documents, and instead of just slapping the thing, they actually took a knife and cut through the documents to reveal the number that they were showing, things like that. So you can do practical effects with that to make it more visually interesting. Or I've seen very effective displays of key information in the environment. So a reporter will do a stand up with a drone and put the key number that you found inside with graphics inside of Soldier Field, right? And that means there's 43,000, whatever. You fly the drone up and it's sitting on the middle of Soldier Field. So I think this is a ongoing challenge with broadcast because a lot of people want to show you how hard they worked by just showing some paperwork. But it's more fun if you. Here's another one I saw that was great. It was a state spending story, and it was all the garbage that people spent money on, and they actually went and they bought it, right? And so they bought this swivel chair. It was like a $400 swivel chair for an office, and they rolled it out in front of the Capitol building. I think it was in Minnesota or something, and spun it around and put the price tag on it, right? And so it's just a different way to show it as opposed to showing a piece of paper that says $400 for a chair. Here's the chair, in front of the guy that bought it. So it's just thinking about it a little differently.
I would just argue to pick up on what Ross said is for a long time, especially when I was first starting out doing it, I found myself writing stories that were meant to impress my colleagues as opposed to impress a point upon viewers. Like you want to go, look, I got a hold of this document, and you want to wave it up in the air because how hard you worked for that. And one thing I've had to fight my natural instinct to do is to say, already, the viewer doesn't really care how hard we worked to do it. Let's make sure you're not drowning them in your information, especially on TV or radio, where they can't go back necessarily and look it up if they miss a fact. Sometimes the key is to only include the 2 or 3 most important things and not try to impress folks by how hard you worked or how many documents you got.
Yeah, I think for radio, it's been a long-standing challenge where we write 2 stories for every story that we do. One is the broadcast story, and it tends to be very narrative heavy and number light. And then there is the web portion where, we can do data visualization, maps, numbers. And so we kind of split the story in 2 components. I think one good example would be Elliot Ramos when he did his tickets. When you hear the broadcast story, he's giving examples of people that he spoke to, who were in massive ticket debt. And then you go online and you see all of the data that he spent years collecting. And so I think it gives us an opportunity to kind of tell the same story in multiple ways.
I have one thing to add to that too, just a specific example, if it's helpful. I recently did a story where the Cook County Clerk's Office was not restricting the names and private information of child sexual assault victims in public case files, so literally victims' names and numbers and addresses were exposed to the public. So I went in there and just stumbled on it on accident. And so anyone could have gone in and see it, obviously putting the victims further at risk. And we just had so many conversations about how do we tell this story in a sensitive way, in a secure way, to further protect the victims and not put them at further risk. And after speaking with trauma experts, we decided not to reach out directly to the victims. I think, in TV stories and in any story, it's so important to get a person impacted, right? And it is. But in this case, we decided it wasn't. We don't always necessarily have to, especially if it, it's not all about us and it's not all about the story. It's about exposing whatever we need to expose. And in this case, we didn't feel like that was the right thing to do, to reach out to them for multiple reasons and try to just interview a victim, just to do it. It didn't feel ethical to us. And so we're like, well, how do we tell this story? All we have is a bunch of documents, and 75% of them we can't show because we have names on them, and private information. So what we did was we actually did something a little different, where we found like cardboard cutouts of like those little kid doll cutouts, and we shot them in a very kind of almost like documentary style way, and we wrote the story to those cutouts as representing those children who the viewer could not see. And so we didn't want to make it like a document heavy story. We wanted to be creative with it, and we wanted a way where we could represent the victims who are affected and make it visual and impactful. But we didn't need to interview the victims directly to get that point across, or even show many documents to get our point across. We actually tried our best to go around that and not show them at all. So just an interesting idea of how to use information you have without actually putting numbers on the screen or interviewing a victim or showing documents.
You guys are good at this. So, all right, going back to our audience questions. In cases where the city becomes aware of your investigative work, how do you ensure that you get records before they cover up information? And to kind of add on to that, I think, there are sometimes instances, I think like with the Tribs Betrayed series that came out a couple of years ago, I think they presented their data to CPS before the story was released, and they included CPS's response in that story. For example, we know the Inspector General does it too. They, present the report, and then the city or police department, whoever responds. I don't know if you all ever, if you do that before the story airs, and obviously include whatever that response is, but also to the audience member's question, making sure that after they give you the data, they don't realize their own problem, and then they fix it before you've had the chance to release it. If that question makes sense. You're all thinking, I can tell. Sama, you're up.
You know what? I had to shift my mindset on this, because for a while, because listen, our main goal is to fix problems. So we got to shift our mindset, and it's actually a good thing if they start fixing the problem, and we report on that, and be transparent and report the process. Like we've done like timelines, like we filed our FOIA this day, we got it, they were on to us, and then within days, all of a sudden, after we started asking questions, the problem is fixed. And obviously it's not about us, but it just shows like, the process. So being transparent about that. And then, so that's a good thing. Again, taking that ownership of like, oh, wow, like just us asking questions, like got some change. It's actually pretty cool. And that's awesome. And that's why we do what we do. So I don't think it kills the story. I think it actually makes the story better, even because you got change, before even doing a story. And so you just report on it.
Anyone else? Any other takers?
I would say people aren't following it as closely as we are. So it's not a sign that you've somehow got beat or, weren't quick enough on the draw to get a story on the air. I think you have sparked that change, and it's okay to take credit for it. And one thing I think Sama and her team at Channel 2 do a great job of is doing the initial story, and then going back, FOIAing the emails that mention Brad Edwards and their story, and then doing a whole other story about how they're upset that, Brad got an Emmy for a story on water department billing. And like, it takes a certain personality to pull that off. Brad's got it. The rest of us might not be comfortable in that, but I think so much of what we do is putting a story out there to get a response and to see how the government responds. Mayor Daley and Rahm were famous for when they knew somebody had FOIA'd something or a bad story was about to drop, they'd miraculously call a news conference at 10 a.m. and say, on our own, we're announcing reform. Oh, was there somebody working on that? Oh, we didn't know. It's just we're here changing lives, So I wouldn't beat yourself up about it, because people are not watching every single day or plugged in every day. They just want to know that you're getting results.
Plus, you have the goods. If you've been working on it and they're changing it, you've got the goods, and your story is going to be way better than the people at the news conference when you do publish.
So another audience question, hang on, I just had it, follows up to the last one that you all just answered. Is requesting FOIA anonymously an option in these cases? Looks, everybody's thinking probably no.
I would, I mean, you know, I don't think so. I don't see why you wouldn't disclose who you are. You know, I think there's ways you can go about getting FOIA documents, you know, or additional documents. Samad talked about, you know, working with victims or working with attorneys who might have more access previously in the panel. And I think that's a really strong strategy. But no, I think it's important to let the folks know who you are.
Also, I do think that some FOIA laws across the country do allow for that. I think that you're not required as any person, not just journalists, but a civilian or resident to give any information about yourself. You literally could just call and file a FOIA, but the challenge is how are they going to get a hold of you and how are you going to follow up on the FOIA? Plus there's, you know, as a journalist, I don't want to come off as misleading or any way, or you know what I mean? And so I think that's the main challenge with that. I think it may be legal, you know, in some places, but I wouldn't necessarily take that direction I think it could actually impact, you know, me personally in trying to get the records and logistics and stuff like that. So that's what I could offer on that.
And if you FOIA the city of Chicago, any request you put in is public record online. The city has a policy where they post it all on the data portal. And I don't recall if I've ever seen anyone doing it anonymously, but it is one example you could see what everyone is working on. And I have noticed that it's actually a lot of private companies that are filing FOIAs more than news organizations.
Ross and Samad, this one's for you as producers, because like before this panel, I kind of polled the folks at Chicago Tonight as well. What questions do you guys have? So obviously I'm in it for selfish reasons. But as producers, I'm curious about sort of your workflow when working with fellow producers on a team, but also with your investigative reporter. And Ben, maybe you want to weigh in on this as well when you're working with a producer. But Ross and Samad, I want to throw it to either of you first, just sort of what's your structure like?
Well, you know, we work on very short-term pieces. I mean, we do a story every day at 6 o'clock, and that's come hell or high water. We're on TV at 6 o'clock, and so there's an aspect of you know, keeping up the daily churn. But I recently have kind of changed my workflow in that in time that I could have spent scrolling on Twitter. I'm changing that to filing a FOIA to find something out. And because I feel like you're wasting your time on social media largely. You know, you think that you have to be there and that there's important things happening there that generally there isn't. So I'm trying to refocus a little bit on that. More on the workflow aspect is I've become pretty adamant about an effective tracking policy. A lot of people don't have them. A lot of newsrooms don't have them. And a lot of people personally don't have them. So what you should do is have a spreadsheet. Just say, you know, I FOIA'd Ben Bradley's office for this on this date, and this is what I asked for, and it's due this date. And then set reminders in your calendar, and you know, so that your phone's just telling you, oh, today's the day I'm supposed to hear back from Ben. What's up with that? And you know, tracking it that way is important for us. Is that the kind of information you were wondering about?
Yeah, a little bit. Just kind of who's in charge. And I think this particular producer was kind of interested, you know, are you doing everything? And then Chuck shows up and does a stand up and then and tracks it. Obviously we're joking, but like a little bit about like, you know, sort of who's in charge of what, like in divvying the workload and then
sure. Well, yeah, well, we're a unique team in that we have 3 full-time producers working with 1 reporter on Chuck's things. And so we all have our long-term projects, which we largely produce, and we work with Chuck directly on those, but the actual FOIAs and things like that are generally driven by the producer. And then but then we also divvy up by day who's on the breaking news, whatever. So then in that case, that's largely driven by Chuck, just to kind of keep us all sane.
Thank you. Yeah, that helps.
I would add to that too, in terms of organizing things. If we're working on a years long investigation or even something that's short term or weeks or months long, oftentimes it's not just one producer. There are times where I may be the only producer on the story, but I may be working with a few other people, and that's on our digital teams across the newsroom, our reporter, another producer. So it's really critical for us to organize everything, files, documents. So creating shared files that we can access information at any point in time, whether it's case files on lawsuits, data sets that we have, something that we can all access depending on what we're doing and if we need to reference it. The FOIA tracking, like you said, Ross, is also very helpful to us, so we can keep following up on those items and checking on them in a timely way. I just think that for us, communication has been so key because there's so many pieces and parts. Our Wrong Raid series is now newsroom wide because once the Anjanette Young story hit, it just became such a huge story that it was beyond just our investigative unit. It was across our newsroom to stay on top of the story and to cover all the angles. So we have to, communicate clearly who's doing what, who's handling, what research, who's handling what nugget and what angle. And that's for any story. So that's been helpful to us in terms of just organization, and especially since some of us are working from home now and aren't in the newsroom, and it's just so much harder to, as crazy as it is, I try to over communicate literally everything because I'm not with the editor when I'm producing the piece anymore, like physically. And that's one of the toughest things for me. So talking a little bit about kind of those challenges I think is important too, is we've had to really create new systems and new ways of doing things. And even if it's just being neurotic and over communicating something a million times to all the different people who are on the story, it doesn't hurt, because it sucks when something falls through the cracks and it's like, damn, we missed that, or, we could have done this better, or, and that happens, it's a process and we're all human. But I've just made that a point of mind, is like things that we just assumed at one point, we can't assume. We have to communicate and be more organized than we ever were.
I would just add that you, even if you're just one person, the only person in your newsroom doing investigations, you need to figure out what your mission is. Because I know, I grew up at Channel 7 working with Ross and Barb and Christine and Gowdy. I learned everything I know from Chuck. And at Channel 7, the mindset is the investigative team is involved in every single big story, even if you don't know it. Meaning something big happens in the city and the newsroom is turning to the investigative team for answers, sources, information, etc. I got to WGN, and as I said, it's this, I'm kind of a halftime investigative reporter, halftime anchor, and we have one producer currently. And your initial instinct is, oh, I want to be involved in everything, and I want to, and then what happens is the newsroom starts forwarding every single wackadoodle tip they've ever had to you, and you're drowning. And my voicemail, I just cleaned it out. It had 97 voicemails on it. And I think 2 of them were legitimate. So I think it's important to set expectations in your own newsroom about what role you want to play. Do they want you for the longer form pieces? Do they want you involved in everyday coverage? Do they want you helping reporters come up with one good nugget of information, to beef up a story that everyone else is doing, but yours is going to look a little better? Because that was a really rough transition for me in that regard. And I think once you identify your mission, even if it's just you'll have a much easier time knowing, yep, that's something I can accomplish. That's in my lane. And that's what my bosses want me to do.
So another question from our audience, and I think this is a good one, and we've only got about 10 minutes left. But Claudia mentioned producing 2 different versions of a story, one for audio, one for the web. Is that something that's becoming common in TV as well? And Claudia, if you want to weigh in on that as well, because obviously the question is about, television, but I'd be interested in a little bit more about like the process of having to do that for radio as well.
Do you want me to go first or the TV first?
You can go first.
So talk more about the process of how
Yeah,
we
of
go
having to
about
write
doing
those two
that.
stories, obviously one for radio and then one for the web where you're allowed to use different kinds of visuals. Because if I'm driving in the car listening to a story, for example, I shouldn't really go to your website to look at the print version of the story.
Yeah, we I guess the goal of the station is to build up the web presence in addition to the radio presence, because we don't always have the same people or the same audiences. Someone who's driving their car listening to Morning Edition isn't necessarily the same person who's going to go on the website at night. And even though that we're still reporting on the same story, and so it does require a little bit more collaboration, particularly on the web side. Where we do need to have more web editors involved, someone to do the coding and the interactive like widgets that we've done for some of the stories, versus the radio side. It's pretty much just the reporter and the editor. And that actually takes, at least me personally, I think that part is more challenging. Writing for a broadcast is constantly like something that you have to work on, because it's very difficult to keep someone engaged on something that can be very complicated, which tends to be the case with FOIA related stories. And so it requires a lot of editing, rewriting, interviewing, finding the right tape, getting the right voices, and then not all of that will transfer over to web. And I don't know if it's the same for TV. In terms of, if they use certain subjects for the TV story versus the web story, or if you guys get more traffic on the TV, more viewers on TV versus web traffic.
I was going to add to that, actually. I think traditionally TV stations just for decades just didn't put digital first. That's just the honest truth. So it was always about, I feel like, just focusing on TV. And I feel like TV stations are viewing themselves more as news stations nowadays, and as newsrooms that are multifaceted. And so our team really puts an emphasis on digital. We don't just put a bunch of resources toward the TV piece. We do the same for digital, and we view them, yes, as extensions of each other, but they also can be different. We may have a whole different plan for how we want the digital story to look compared to how the TV story looks. And we don't just kind of throw what's on the cutting room floor on digital, which I think sometimes happens, it's kind of like, all right, well, whatever didn't make the TV piece, we're just going to put online and like, it's fine, and sometimes, that's all right. But it's, I think that being more thoughtful about how things look on digital is so critical for TV stations, because that's where your story lives forever. Your TV story usually airs once, and then you put it online, but you gotta find, we have to find better ways to have them complement each other. They can complement each other, but sometimes that means that they actually both look very different, and it is helpful at times. Sometimes you can't fit everything in a TV story, and you do need to go more in depth online. But to me, that involves more than just taking the TV script and translating, and just putting it on the website, because there's so much more information, data, documents that you may not have been able to put on TV, or may just be a mention because of time. And it's crazy because sometimes our team will literally do like 7 or 8 minute TV pieces, and you think that's enough time to get everything on air, and it's not. And there's, so much more information to it. I'm sure same with radio, like interviews, extended interviews, or interviews with other people who just didn't make the piece for whatever reason. It helps to build that out online, put people's stories and voices online in a creative way. We don't always have time to do that for every single story, but it's worth it to be thoughtful where that, those elements exist for certain stories, and take the time to do that.
Yeah, and I've tried to find ways to make digital more useful, if that makes any sense. In that, like, the TV you can show the great characters, have the great video and those things, but I like to have our digital pieces have something that they can interact with. So here's the vaccine numbers in your zip code, whatever. Here's a map you can plug in, those kinds of things, and have some reason to be on digital that isn't just regurgitating what we've told you on TV.
A service, essentially. You can offer a service on digital that you may not be able to on TV.
But I love what Sama said, that's where your story lives forever. So you should care about what it looks like there, because our TV mindset had been, oh, it's all about the broadcast, the broadcast, the broadcast. We historically for the last few years have not been putting a lot of worded content with our investigative stories. So we're not just transcribing the story on the web, because we want people to click on the video link, because that's how you make more money on a website. So in some ways, the verbiage you put on the website becomes a tease to get people to actually watch the story above, click the video link above. Though we're pushing more in a different direction now, because Nexstar our corporate owner has a priority of digital. So, they've just hired, I think, half a dozen digital first people, including a second investigative producer for us, who is going to, help us produce TV content, but also produce digital content.
So we've got one last question that I want to try and get to in these 4 minutes, guys. So you're all broadcasters, you can work with 4 minutes. How do you all scour through public records when under deadline? Quickest way to do this, useful resources.
The best way to do
F.
Control.
Control F.
That's a good point, though. Control F and search for your word. Go ahead, Ross.
Best way to do it, I think, is be prepared ahead of time. So have the exact website addresses, if it's a fire, this, and this is available. Here's how you get it. So that, break it down, anticipate plane crashes, bridge collapses, whatever, and think about where to go. That'll give you the biggest head start.
Collaboration, if you just got something that is literally, and you're in a breaking news situation and it's like 300 pages, alert your newsroom managers immediately so you can start devising a plan. You may think that you don't have time to do that, but that is what's going to save you time. It's taking just 5 minutes to take a deep breath and coordinate who's going to read. When that Jesse Smollett video came down, we had a plan. We were like, you're watching this video, you're watching this, you're reading through these documents. It was still, crazy because it was breaking news, but we had a plan in place that just helped guide us. And obviously it's fluid, it can change. But that was really, really, really helpful to us, is just taking that breath. We're all like, when we get that data dump or whatever, document dump, we all feel our chest just start lighting up, like, oh my God, what am I going to do with this? And I think that just knowing that you have an opportunity to just take a minute and plan, and that will make your coverage better.
Yeah, one of the biggest challenges is knowing when to stop doing research and when to start writing. So I say set timers and white noise. And sometimes it's good to just put everything aside, get a blank piece of paper and just start writing. And you actually realize that you do know a lot more than you thought you did, or that the story, is more formulated than you thought. And you're not buried in the weeds with a lot of data, which is probably one of the biggest struggles for me, is to know, okay, now you need to stop reading, you need to start writing.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. I think we made it with 2 minutes to spare. Any other top tips? If not, I'm making sure we don't have any other questions, and I think we're good, actually. No, I want to thank all of you for joining me. I appreciate it. We're good with questions. Thanks to our attendees for joining us, and enjoy the rest of FOIA Fest.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.